The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
With regards to the situation with pay in local staff and local staff. So a quick recap of the two-year deal that we're currently in the end of. It was a two-year deal that runs through to the end of March next year. It is largely 2% and 2% for the vast majority of staff. So it did include a substantial amount of bottom loading for employees on the very bottom pay almost 16%. And that was predominantly as a result of the new pay spine introduced on the 1st of April, which was necessitated by the introduction of the national living wage. The fact that we had to build in between local government and the national living wage. So some quick facts and figures. Some quick facts and figures. The bottom rate is currently £9 an hour. That's above the national living wage rate of £8.21. That £8.21 figure was due to be, or the £8.21 figure was due to be announced in the budget that was planned for 6th of December. But that's obviously being put on hold as a result of the election. So whenever the budget is, which will probably be in January now, we expect that £8.20 to be increased. And in the italics below, the forecast for that figure issued by the Office of Budget Responsibility, which gets us to current forecast about £9.50 by 2023. Although you would have heard the Chancellor say in his speech that the Conservative Party now has a new target of a national living wage of £10.50 1st of April 2024. And as I'll come on to explain that and the position of the Labour Party is why there will be a pause in the negotiating process until at least the new year. Happened to the bottom rate in local government since 2002, when we were £8 an hour. It took 13 years until 2015 for us to get to £7 an hour, and then we've achieved that same rate of growth, another £2 increase in those 4 years to get us to the current £9 an hour. As I will explain towards the end, the Labour Party policy for a living wage rate of £10 an hour. So if they win the election, we can expect our bottom rate to be at least £10 an hour in April next year, which sets us another huge challenge. As you can see here, this is a rough estimation to try and show the challenge that we face. So looking at the blue stripes, the bottom rate in local government is currently £9 an hour. If we assume 2% increases each year, and that is purely for illustrative purposes, please don't think that the employers have decided that pay increases will be 2% a year for the next year. But for the sake of argument, 2% each year gets us in 2024 to about £9.83. The Labour Party were to form the next government, the bottom rate in local government will need to be £10 an hour first of April next year. Again, if we assume 2% increases, then by 2024, about £10. The statutory minimum rate will be at about £10.80. And you can see in the grey boxes, that's the current forecast by the Office of Budget Responsibility, although that last box there is the government's new target of £10.50 an hour. So either way, whether we have a Labour government in the short term or a Conservative government in the next year, we are looking at either some bigger pay award to get us to at least £10.50 in 2024, or, I'm afraid, another reconfiguration of the national pay spine in order to get our bottom rate up to where it needs to be. Either needs to happen in the very short term, i.e. In the new year, at some point over the next two or three. The unions claim, apart from the claim for a 10% pay award, is for an increase to the annual leave entitlement. The current minimum Green Book annual leave entitlement is 21 days plus 2 extra statutory days, with 4 days after 5 years. That has been the minimum since April 2009. Prior to 2009, the minimum annual leave entitlement was 20 days plus 5 days after 5 years. Having consulted councils last for their views on the union's pay claim, there are very, very few councils whose annual leave entitlement is as low as 21 days. But by comparison, and again, please don't think that we're dropping hints as to where we think local government should be, but purely for illustrative purposes, because this will be an argument that unions will make. The NHS minimum leave is only 27 days, 29 days after 5 years, 33 after 10. So we are still some way behind the NHS when it comes to minimum annual leave entitlement. The unions are also seeking a 2-hour reduction in the working week. Standard working week for full-time employees is 37 hours, 36 in London. Again, as a result of the consultation we carried out with councils, there was absolutely no one in favour of meeting this element of the union's claim. Although you would have heard from the Shadow Chancellor at the Labour Party conference, recent debates surrounded the general election, that the Labour Party has a policy of achieving a 32-hour working week within 10 years of a Labour government coming. So again, depending on the outcome of the national general election, this may be something that we have to revisit in the years ahead, but I don't expect to see this featuring in a pay deal for next year. As we've said, the national employers have decided to be in a position to respond to the pay claim until the impact of the outcome of the general election is known, which they do not expect until the new year. There are primarily two reasons for this, as I've mentioned. First, we need to know whether either of the main parties forms a majority government. If, as I've said, the Labour Party forms a government, then we get our bottom rate up to at least £10 an hour by 1st of April next year. So that will require a speedy renegotiation of the pay spine, which we went through in 2018, built in that headroom that I mentioned earlier, and hoped that that the new pay spine that came in April this year would be and a year. So we would have to respond to that. However, if the Conservative Party form the next government, we're not looking at reconfiguring the pay spine in the short term, but as I've shown, certainly over the next few years, we will need to do something to get our bottom rate up to where it needs to be by 2024. So the view that the national employers took when they met on the 5th of November was that they could not make a pay offer until the outcome of the election is known, because they didn't want to find themselves in a position of making a pay offer, which they then took off, would have to then take off the table to respond to events. A subsequent question has arisen as to whether the employers should wait for a budget to be announced. So again, if there's a clear majority government when we wake up on Friday the 13th of December, I would expect the budget to be to take place sometime during January. However, if there's not a majority government and we're looking at a minority government trying to form some coalition, obviously delay things, those negotiations can last for weeks. So all of that impacts on the timing. So I'm afraid it is highly, highly unlikely to have a pay deal agreed and in place, ready to go for April. This has the potential of dragging on for time, not just because of the general election, but because the views expressed by councils at the pay briefings suggested the overwhelming majority of them had budgeted for 2 or 2 point something percent. The unions claim it's for 10. So even if there weren't the issue of the general election, we will be quite some way apart on day one, whenever the employers make an offer, because the offer won't be anywhere near the union's claim of 10%. So we are in for some quite long and difficult negotiations, which could go on into the spring, maybe even the summer. The fourth and final element of the union's claim related to a review of workplace causes of stress and mental health. So we've asked councils whether guidance on this would be welcomed. The general view was guidance would be welcomed as long as such guidance helpful and not just a rehash or a cut and paste of all the existing guidance that's out there. So we've asked all of whom have got local policies relating to stress, mental health and well-being to share to share with us policies of which they're particularly proud, so that when the unions, if we get into negotiations on this with the unions, we know what already exists. So as I say, that was a very quick run through that basically says nothing's going to happen until at least the new year. As I've said, it will all depend on the outcome of the general election. But we will, whilst we won't post a running commentary on our website, we will post updates as and when we are able to say something on this link here. Okay, so thank you, and I hope you found that useful. and apologies for the gremlins at the start.
Frozen. Good morning. My name is Selina Lansley. I'm a senior advisor at the LGA and I lead on teachers' pay. Firstly, thank you to my colleague Harry for the update on pay for local government services. This morning I'm going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes providing a quick update on 4 areas. Just bear with me a moment. So, firstly, I'm going to give you an overview of the National Pay Framework for teachers. I'll touch on the work of the national employers, provide a reminder on the Teachers' Pay Award for 2019, before focusing on teachers' pay for 2020. So, a quick reminder around the National Pay Framework. I'm sure the majority, if not all of you, have heard of the School Teachers Pay and Conditions document, snappy title, Pay and Conditions document for short. This is a statutory document. It's updated every year to reflect the government's decisions on pay and conditions for teachers. Academies have the freedom to do their own thing, and the document is written by civil servants, not practitioners, therefore making it a very difficult read. I find it quite useful if I'm looking to drop off to sleep at night, so it is a very difficult read. At the request of schools and academies and local authorities, the LGA produced an annual pay reference circular that sets out the historical pay points once the final pay document is published. And this is probably the most popular output that I produce. So that's the pay and conditions document that sets out the pay and terms and conditions for teachers every year. The School Teacher Review Board is the body, independent body that make recommendations on teachers' pay, and they're appointed by government. Apart from 2018, recommendations of the Review Board have always been agreed. So, in terms of the process, it starts with the Secretary of State issuing a remit, and then the School Teacher Review Body collects evidence, including working with statutory consultees, and that includes us as the national employers, which is called NEOS, the National Employers Organisation for School Teachers. Also, the National Governance Association and unions are also statutory consultees, so they feed into the evidence in order for the review body to produce a report. In terms of the national employers' response, this is where local authorities' input is crucial. I draft questions based on the remit in order to inform the national employers' written response to the review body and to the draft pay and conditions document. And I need these responses from local authorities to best reflect the employer's position. Once I've drafted the written evidence, that gets approved by the national employers. What happens next is a couple of months later, the review body invite NEOS to an oral evidence session, and I go along with colleagues to answer their questions from the employer's perspective. Highlight of my year. The whole process, from the Secretary of State issuing the remit to the review body publishing the report, is roughly around 6 months. What happens then, or has in the last couple of years, is the government, there are lots of interdepartmental discussions and wranglings. And most recently, the pay and conditions document has been published very late in July. In 2018, it was in July, and in 2019, this year, it was in September. And bearing in mind that teachers' annual pay increase date is the 1st of September, I can only imagine the problems that is causing people like yourself in terms of consulting and implementing the pay awards. So, on to a quick overview of the National Employers' work. So in terms of NEOS, its main role is really to approve the responses to the consultations back to the review body and on the draft pay and conditions document. In terms of members, it includes the LGA cross-party members, the faith schools, including Church of England and the Catholic Education Services, and the Confederation of School Trusts. The Welsh LGA are also members, as although teachers' pay is now devolved to the Welsh Government, NEOS is in effect the employer-side joint secretary for the Burgundy Book, which still applies for Wales. So, moving on to the main course, teachers' pay. I'm going to touch on teachers' pay for 2019, and I'm sure you're all well aware teachers were awarded 2.75% on the pay ranges for 2019. But only 0.75% was funded by the DfE in the form of the teachers' pay grant. In terms of that pay grant, there's centrally employed teachers, of which the school census shows 5,002 centrally employed teachers, an equivalent of 3,863 full-time equivalents, not being included in the teachers' pay grant since 2018. Although they are included in the pensions grant for teachers. So a bit of a confusing position, and it's something here at the LGA and Employer Link that we continue to lobby government on in terms of adequate funding. The teachers' pay grant allocations, as I'm sure you're all aware, have been published up until March 2020, and we've been told that this grant will continue until March 2022. So now on to moving on to teachers' pay for 2020. So as I mentioned earlier, the Secretary of State issued a remit, which he did in September of this year. And this year, the review body has been asked to pay particular attention to the government's current policy statement that teachers will start on 30,000 by 2022 and more for the London area. They've also been asked to look at advisory pay points. And from the meetings that I've attended around the regions, many of you have described this as a reintroduction of the national pay spines that were abolished in 2013. That's something that the pay points are something that NEOS welcome. With regard to flatter structure, until we see the DfE evidence, it's unclear what changes the government envisage in terms of how they see the model of teachers' pay and the flatter structure playing out within that. So that's the headlines for the remit. So as I mentioned, in terms of responding back to both the review board and government in terms of the draft pay and conditions, I consult councils. It's a very important part of my role. And that happened recently in September. I sent out a number of questions to local authorities asking for evidence and information on things that were relevant to the SDRB remit. So just to give you a flavour of the headlines that came back, be no surprise to you, continued recruitment and retention issues and financial difficulties across all schools. Where it was known, because it's still quite early, school finance leads told me that 2% was still being budgeted for staff pay increases for 2020. But it was local authorities and schools have made it quite clear that because it's 2% is being budgeted, it does not mean that all schools have that money within their budget without having to make significant savings, i.e. cuts elsewhere. In terms of the 30,000 starting salary and the flatter structure, the main concerns were around budgets, with assimilation costs and the ability to reward year-on-year progression being raised as very important issues and concerns for yourselves. And most importantly, it was about the retention of experienced teachers and the negative impact that this may have. We threw in a couple of asks as well. In terms of responses, what we heard from local authorities and schools and academies was that it was a good time for the review body to look at allowing teachers to voluntarily move from the upper pay range down to the main pay range in the school. That's been an issue for many of you when I've been going to my meetings and we answer queries from HR professionals and the likes. I've also asked for a review of safeguarding, which, as you'll all know, is pay protection, as it's out of kilter with support staff within schools and also within wider industry norms. So that's the response that's been drafted. In terms of what happens next, which I'm sure you'll all be most interested about, so the election, just like local government services, is causing delays. As I've mentioned, in terms of the consultation, I've consulted local authorities, schools, head teachers, governing boards, and the written submission was approved by the national employers, because we did have a submission deadline for the review body by the 13th of November. But due to the election and the pre-election period, DfE were unable to submit their evidence by that before the pre-election PERDO, many people call it, period. So the whole cycle has had a delay. It's likely to be in the new year, and we expect there'll be a knock-on impact on the rest of the pay cycle. Still news on the new deadline, and we'll have to see what emerges in the new year. NEOST made the point that schools need adequate time to review, to plan, to consult, to agree and implement any significant reforms that come from that are proposed in terms of teachers' pay and conditions for 2020. And in that, I mean more than a couple of months. So we'll be making that point very strongly. My final point is in terms of the national employers, members are really keen to improve the evidence from local authorities, both in terms of the quality and the quantity. So, next time you see a request from me or your colleague, please respond as best you can. We are working with HR leads and school finance leads to strengthen the authority response, as well as working with our internal research. And personally, I would rather have a response with one or two of my questions answered than no response at all. So on that note, I hope that's the end of the whistle-stop tour on Teachers' Pay Framework and the Teachers' Pay for 2019 and 20. Thank you for listening.